Good evening YouTube, my name is Sean Connors and welcome back to The Outsiders. The sameoldji asked a few questions looking for some video responses, and one of the questions he asked is all about when you bring the group together for the first time, do you set expectations? Do you sit down and go through some things? And the answer to that is yes. I've got in front of me here a book. I have multiple books, I'm always filling them in as a GM. I keep a lot of notes on stuff. You'll probably see it's a pretty battered book, but it's got some beautiful gold dust stuff in here. I use these books, I've mentioned it in a number of videos, on pretty much anything. Let's just flick a page open and see what we've got. Yeah, there's a letter here from a particular person. I've written down a letter I wrote down about sarcophaguses, is the Greek word meaning flesh eating. This is one of the books I've used before. I'm sure I've shown this in one of the other videos, all about different feats and ideas, magic items, stuff like that. But where I wanted to go is on the very first page. I've just opened those two sides to this. You won't be able to read it there, this one's in pencil. But effectively, these first two pages, they sum up an agenda, a meeting. And now, normally, when you have a group, and let's say it's an established group, and I'll take my London-based group. If we're looking to advertise for a player, which doesn't happen very often, and when we do, often the spaces fill incredibly fast. I mean, I don't think I've gone without finding a player. I normally get a player to take a seat within a week because people know this group is rare to get a space for. So when it does come up, and it comes up occasionally, people have to fit in with the agenda of the group and myself. So it's never a problem. You don't really need to go through that because the players will tell that player, we'll have already vetted them out a little bit before they sit down at the table. But when you're putting a group together for the first time, you pretty much take anybody, within reason, you pretty much take anybody. And it's probably at that meeting, before, as you're rolling out the characters, stuff like that, the first time you get an opportunity to set the groundwork, and actually find a little bit out about each other. So without really too much fuss, let me give you some pointers for what I normally do. I do the basics. I always introduce, it's an introduction. Everybody gets to introduce themselves, and it's probably better that you start with the players first. Let them introduce themselves. Let's start with you guys first. Let's go around and find out a little bit about ourselves. And you want to really focus, obviously, on them as a person, a little bit about what they do, but in reality, what their experience is as far as role play, what games have they played, that sort of thing. And then you want to go into a bit more depth. So that's the first sort of question. Second question I normally ask things like, what do you as a person do you think you bring to the group? What do you bring to the table? What's your gift? What's your specialism? What do you think you bring? And they can give you a multitude of answers, but from those answers you can glean some real gems. And you can find out a little bit about the person. Never be afraid to probe a little bit deeper. So if somebody says, I think what I bring to the group is leadership, you can then, don't be afraid to prod them a little bit deeper. So could you explain that? Could you give us an example? Always very useful, because you can find out a little bit about people without putting them too much on the spot. And you have to use a little bit of a judgment call here. If you think the person's a little bit timid, a little bit shy, just get a basic answer, it's fine, but you just have to gauge it as you see it. Question 3 I normally ask this is all about forming a group. What is role play to you, and what do you understand it to be? Because that's quite fundamental. Because you want to find out, they might have had 20 years experience, but if their experience is let's kick down the door and smash it down, the role play, in terms of the word role play, that's probably not really in their vocabulary. So you need to quantify those parts because they're important. Question 4. Now, if you're using a system, and in this particular one I wrote down, it was all about, at the time it was 3.5, and obviously there'd been 3rd edition, then 3.5 had come out, so I was putting together a group for 3.5. Now, it could equally be I'm taking a group from 3.5 to Pathfinder, or you might have a game, I think it's like you're doing Shadowrun. And there's been multiple versions of that game with some changes. So the truth is, you'll ask the question in your case, what is Shadowrun to you? What does it mean? And are you aware of all the changes of previous editions? And it's brilliant to get that fleshed out here because, you can quickly, give your house little bits in there that you want to talk about, but you want it, again, to be fairly specific. If it's too much information, it's information overload, but enough. So, people can give their view of it. They may never have played your Shadowrun. They may never have played Pathfinder. They may never have played 3.5. But at least you'll know where their degree of experience lies. You'll already have an inkling anyway because you've asked for the most basic things like, introduce yourself. But this will really quantify that. Question 5. What are the keys to success for a long-term group in your view? What do you think are the right things that you need to be able to be successful. And go around and get people's opinions on that and then give your own. My general view on it is you need flexibility, commitment, and having the right attitude around the table are the three keys to succeed as a group. Because if you don't have the flexibility and the commitment and the right attitude, the reality is that it won't last. Because if you're not flexible, things happen and people need to be flexible. Commitment, you need to be able to come when you say you're going to come. You need to make it, and you need to have the right attitude around the table for everybody concerned. I normally do make a point of explaining, a little bit about the better players, but I'll explain that that's not really necessary. It's just to get their gauge of it, as you'll see in a minute with the next questions. I then talk, question 6, I then talk about the particular campaign I'm about to run. Now, I don't go into too much depth because we're obviously going to cover that off as we do characters, but I need to give them an overview of the campaign. Question 7. What makes a great campaign? So in their view, what makes a great campaign for them? So what is it they're looking for from the game? What do they want from it? Now, one thing to not get too bogged down on here is, if you're bringing a group together for the first time, do not, in my view, don't weave a fantastic web of storylines because you don't know what you're going to have around that table. You're going to have a multitude of players. It's going to take you at least a session or two to get to grips with the type of player types you have, and I have done videos on this. But the most important thing here is to make sure that you have stories that are set up that are pretty much mission-based in this case. So that for this first campaign, you can find your feet, find the players' tastes, and keep it fairly simple. Later, you can still weave some deepness into those story threads and still have threads that come backwards and forwards and over arc and all that sort of stuff. But at the beginning, keep it really simple so that you can get people involved quickly into the story. Because if you get a group of players around the table that aren't really into the deeper thread, you've wasted an awful lot of time on your campaign, and I wouldn't do that. With the greatest will in the world, when it's a new group, you are flogging a dead horse because you don't know what you're going to get. So I think it's always better, personally, to just keep it fairly simple, keep it very mission-based, and you will go a long way. I would then go into myself. Obviously, you're going to have to give your view as well of what makes a great campaign. And then at question 8, I would say, how would you describe your GMing style, and what in your view makes a great player? So those are quite important at question 8. It's a double-edged question. It's about your GMing style, so they understand you as a GM, and equally what you want from them as players. That's a fair question to ask. At number 9, I always ask about I always tell them what my house rules are. So if they've played previous editions, I'll explain the house rules. If no one's played Shadowrun before, you don't really need to go into the house rules because they don't know the gaming system, so it's not really important. But there will always likely be someone around the table that does, and you can just explain what it is and why you've made the changes. You don't necessarily have to quantify it, but if you have a really valuable reason why you're doing something, that really helps, particularly with certain player types, get the buy-in straight away. And I always put a nice little piece at the end of it, how to survive one of my games. And the reason I put that in is because I know my games are very tough. I roll my dice very openly. I design my games with a particular style in mind, and I expect the players to have a level of decency and courtesy around the table and have fun. So I always put it in there, and people laugh about it. But it's good. It's good to make it a challenge, and it's important because if players really believe that you're going to put your games, it's going to be fair, but it's going to be tough, and you're going to have to work together and all those sort of things. It makes every success very, very powerful rather than being a cakewalk. So that's why I put it in, and those are my keys to the basics about when you bring the group together, the beginning agenda. And I hope that helps you, and I hope that it's of some value to other people as well. Anyway, I won't surmise because there's too much to cover. I'm sure it's in the video and you'll sure see it for yourself. But I hope that answers your question. And I've been Sean Connors, and this has been Outsiders. Until the next time on The Late Show, take care of yourselves and happy gaming. Bye-bye.